I am observing what may constitute the most systematic dismantling of democratic institutional architecture in American history, and the implications extend far beyond domestic politics into the fundamental stability of the international order that has prevented global conflict since World War II. As I analyze the accelerating pace of norm destruction, the calculated targeting of oversight mechanisms, and the comprehensive strategy to consolidate executive power beyond constitutional constraints, I recognize that we are witnessing not merely political turbulence, but the methodical deconstruction of the institutional frameworks that have maintained democratic governance for 2.5 centuries, with consequences that will reshape global power dynamics in ways that hostile authoritarian regimes are positioning themselves to exploit. The second Trump presidency operates under different constraints than the first, armed with a systematic understanding of institutional vulnerabilities and a comprehensive strategy to neutralize the checks and balances that previously limited presidential power. The Supreme Court's immunity decision has essentially granted the presidency legal protection for official acts that would previously have been constrained by criminal law, while the systematic removal of career civil servants and their replacement with political loyalists eliminates the institutional resistance that characterized the first administration. I am tracking the implementation of what appears to be a comprehensive plan to transform the American presidency from a constitutionally limited office into an executive authority that operates beyond the practical constraints of congressional oversight, judicial review, or bureaucratic resistance. The Department of Justice represents the most critical institutional battlefield in this transformation, as its independence from political interference serves as the foundation for rule of law that distinguishes democratic governance from authoritarian systems. The systematic installation of loyalist leadership throughout DOJ hierarchy, combined with the explicit targeting of career prosecutors who participated in investigations of the previous administration, creates a law enforcement apparatus that operates according to political priorities rather than legal standards. This transformation extends beyond personnel changes into the fundamental mission of federal law enforcement, converting agencies designed to uphold legal standards into instruments for advancing political objectives and targeting political opponents. What particularly concerns me in this analysis is the international dimension of American institutional degradation, and how authoritarian leaders worldwide are coordinating their efforts to exploit this democratic vulnerability. Putin, Xi Jinping, and other authoritarian leaders have invested decades in strategies designed to undermine democratic institutions globally, and the successful implementation of these strategies within the United States provides a model for authoritarian consolidation that can be exported worldwide. The erosion of American democratic institutions removes the primary global advocate for democratic governance while simultaneously demonstrating that democratic systems are vulnerable to internal subversion through legal and electoral means. The intelligence community faces unprecedented challenges as political loyalty requirements supersede professional competence and institutional independence, creating gaps in national security assessment and response capabilities that hostile foreign powers are positioned to exploit. The systematic purging of intelligence professionals who provided assessments that contradicted political preferences eliminates the institutional memory and analytical capabilities that enable effective threat assessment, while the politicization of intelligence reporting means that national security decisions increasingly reflect political considerations rather than objective threat analysis. This degradation of intelligence capabilities occurs precisely when global threats require sophisticated analytical capabilities and international coordination that politicized institutions cannot provide effectively. Congressional oversight mechanisms designed as the primary constitutional check on executive power have been systematically undermined through a combination of procedural manipulation, information denial, and the normalization of executive branch non-compliance with legislative demands. The precedent of ignoring congressional subpoenas, withholding documents, and preventing witness testimony creates a framework where legislative oversight becomes largely ceremonial rather than functionally effective. I am observing the emergence of what constitutional scholars describe as an imperial presidency that operates beyond meaningful legislative constraint while maintaining the appearance of democratic governance through electoral processes that continue to function within increasingly constrained parameters. The federal judiciary, traditionally the ultimate arbiter of constitutional disputes, faces systematic pressure through political attacks on judicial independence, threats of court packing or jurisdiction stripping, and the installation of judges selected primarily for ideological alignment rather than judicial temperament. The Supreme Court's ethical scandals and partisan decision-making patterns undermine public confidence in judicial neutrality precisely when constitutional challenges require institutional credibility and public acceptance of judicial authority. Lower federal courts face similar pressures through case assignment manipulation, appeals to higher courts with predictable ideological outcomes, and political pressure campaigns designed to influence judicial decision-making. The normalization process that enables this institutional degradation operates through what psychologists term shifting baseline syndrome, where each new norm violation becomes the reference point for evaluating subsequent behavior rather than maintaining consistent standards for democratic governance. Media coverage that treats unprecedented norm violations as routine political developments accelerates this normalization process, while public attention spans insufficient for tracking long-term institutional changes, allows systematic degradation to proceed without sustained resistance. The cumulative effect creates a political environment where behavior that would have triggered constitutional crisis in previous decades becomes accepted as normal political hardball. International allies who have depended on American leadership for democratic solidarity and institutional support find themselves increasingly isolated as the United States transitions from promoting democratic governance to modeling authoritarian consolidation. NATO's collective security framework assumes democratic decision-making processes within member nations, while American institutional degradation undermines the credibility and reliability that alliance structures require for effective operation. The European Union faces the challenge of maintaining democratic standards and alliance commitments, while the United States models institutional subversion and authoritarian consolidation techniques that far-right parties across Europe are adapting for their own political systems. The economic implications of institutional breakdown extend beyond domestic policy into global financial stability and trade relationships that depend on predictable legal frameworks and institutional continuity. International investment and trade agreements assume legal systems that operate according to consistent standards rather than political favoritism, while currency stability depends on confidence in institutional frameworks that can maintain policy continuity across electoral transitions. The erosion of institutional independence introduces political risk factors into economic relationships that could destabilize global financial systems designed around assumptions of American institutional stability. Intelligence agencies in allied nations face the unprecedented challenge of maintaining information-sharing relationships with American counterparts while protecting sensitive sources and methods from potential compromise through politicized American institutions. The Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance and similar cooperation frameworks assume institutional independence and professional competence that political interference undermines, creating intelligence gaps that hostile powers can exploit while democratic allies struggle to maintain effective intelligence coordination. This breakdown in intelligence cooperation occurs precisely when global threats require enhanced coordination and information sharing across democratic institutions. Civil society organizations and democratic movements worldwide lose their primary international supporter and model for institutional resistance, as American institutions demonstrate vulnerability to authoritarian capture through legal and electoral means. The organizations that have supported democratic transitions and institutional development globally find themselves operating without American support while confronting authoritarian movements that can point to American institutional breakdown as evidence that democratic governance ultimately fails under pressure. This global demonstration effect accelerates authoritarian consolidation worldwide while eliminating international support for democratic resistance. The long-term consequences of this institutional erosion extend beyond electoral cycles into fundamental questions about whether democratic institutions can be restored once authoritarian control techniques are successfully implemented. Historical examples of democratic breakdown suggest that institutional restoration requires sustained political commitment and popular mobilization that authoritarian systems are specifically designed to prevent through legal manipulation, information control, and selective enforcement that makes organized resistance increasingly difficult. The techniques being implemented for institutional capture are designed to be self-reinforcing and increasingly difficult to reverse through normal political processes. What makes this institutional crisis particularly dangerous is its intersection with global challenges that require institutional competence and international cooperation for effective response. Climate change, technological disruption, economic inequality, and great power competition all demand sophisticated institutional responses and sustained international coordination that degraded institutions cannot provide effectively. The timing of American institutional breakdown coincides with historical challenges that require precisely the kind of institutional capacity and international leadership that authoritarian consolidation eliminates. The propaganda and information warfare dimensions of this institutional transformation operate through comprehensive efforts to undermine public confidence in democratic institutions while promoting authoritarian alternatives as more effective and legitimate. Social media platforms amplify narratives that portray democratic institutions as corrupt and ineffective while presenting authoritarian efficiency as preferable to democratic deliberation and compromise. This information environment accelerates institutional degradation by reducing public support for democratic institutions while increasing tolerance for authoritarian methods that promise immediate results without institutional constraints. As I conclude this analysis, I recognize that we are witnessing the implementation of a systematic strategy for democratic institutional capture that extends far beyond American politics into a global challenge to democratic governance itself. The success of authoritarian consolidation techniques within the United States provides a roadmap for similar efforts worldwide while eliminating the international support and institutional models that democratic movements have historically relied upon for resistance and restoration. The decisions made about institutional defense and restoration over the next several years will determine whether democratic governance survives as a viable model for human organization or whether authoritarian systems become the dominant form of political organization for the remainder of this century and beyond.